While there is still no word on a cure for the virus,
report suspicious activity in the call 911.
I can give you every assurance, Mr. Rodriguez. It's full and he's
And it was anybody in above us, the pass was like 30 seconds ago. The UFOs.
Howdy, folks. Welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, bud.
Hey, man. How are you?
How we doing? Pretty good. I mean, been better. There's just, family stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think
So-
we posted about it on our page and haven't really done much.
Yeah.
Since.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the sort of conspiratorial slash, childlike, true believer side of me likes to look at this as if, like, maybe what we're talking about today happened to my uncle and he's totally fine. But basically, long story short, my wife and I, my uncle, always been wonderful. Him and his wife, always been so nice and so kind to me from the very beginning. And he, I guess a few weeks ago, was sort of the first sign that, maybe he had some dementia kind of creeping in. He disappeared from his home, but he drove back within the hour. And then, his wife, when she was like, she's freaking out. She's like, where have you been? And, his response was, well, I had to go to work. And that was kind of the first. And then the following week or two later, which would have been last Monday, they filled up the gas. They did their kind of errands earlier in the day. They come back, brought the groceries in, and then there was a case of water that was still in the car. And she's like, I'm gonna rest for a minute. And he was like, no, I'll get it. And then walked back out of the car, and then poof, that was it.
Man.
She immediately reported it. And then we found since then, my uncle's really connected with a lot of the law enforcement. He works as a probation officer, sort of up in that area, Blairsville kind of area.
Different
And
uncle.
yeah,
okay.
different uncle. Yeah. Sorry. The uncle in question that I'm talking about we've always called him Gene. His real name is Byron, but I've never known him as Byron. But yeah, Gene Jones is what we've always called him. And he was spotted on what's called a flock camera, which I'd never heard of until this. But I think typically these cameras are used for people that are sort of escaping, like the law, or trying to maneuver, get away from, law enforcement stuff. But as soon as his wife, Margaret, called in and reported it, basically they kind of set it up. Okay, well, if he's been spotted here, and at this point it would have been, I think, like 9 o'clock, like 9 p.m.
Eastern
basically.
Standard Time.
Eastern EST, yeah. And he was spotted on this flock cam going in this particular direction. Well, they immediately kind of, the police department in the area, which, by the way, it's the terrible part is that this whole area is just it's like mountain towns basically. It's in North Georgia. It's but there's tons of mountains, tons of
Windy
curvy-
roads and
yeah,
random,
and it's, like little dirt
Yeah,
roads
yeah.
and gravel roads
Yeah.
and
it's easy to get turned around.
oh yeah, big time. And so they discovered. They were like, okay, well, if he's past this camera at this time, then there's only a couple more options. He should be hitting this camera, this other flock camera that's 20 minutes away, within this window. He should hit this camera if he went the other way within this window. And he just never did. And so, there's been like a minimum of like 100 to 150, maybe more people from all over the place coming up to sort of what's called the Blue Ridge area, which is where Woody and I, a favorite place of Woody and I is Expedition Bigfoot, the Sasquatch Bigfoot Museum. But yeah, people from all over have been coming to look. We were up there almost every day, and yeah, it's kind of crazy, and it's really sad because I feel like my aunt, there's just no closure because there's no car, there's no anything. Now there was this is one of the interesting things though. My grandmother is dealing with dementia, but it's been a pretty long sort of process. It's been over the course of like 4 or 5 years, where it started out kind of small, and then now it's gotten to where it's almost like their mind like resets like within a few minutes or something, to where like they're mid conversation and then suddenly they don't really recognize you. So it's super sad.
Yeah.
But with him, we had the one incident a few weeks back, and then, it's like it just went 0 to 100. But there was a situation to where some people went into a gas station, and there was the attendant was there, and he was, at first I think he said no, and then maybe some more people that were sort of on the hunt came through and were asking. He was like, actually, there was a guy, and I think he thought that he was homeless because my uncle all he had on was like a t-shirt and shorts, and he's like sort of an old guy. He looked kind of confused, I'm sure. They said also no car. I mean, no credit cards, debit cards, no wallet, no cash, no phone. The Sirius sort of subscription, which I don't understand this. The Sirius subscription in his car, even though it's ran off of a satellite, so there has to be a receiver in that vehicle. For some reason, that doesn't work. Also, I looked up, and in Toyota vehicles from 2010 onward, there's an internal GPS. Magically, that doesn't seem to work. But anyway, so he has nothing. But they said that this guy was like, yeah, this dude came in. It was, pretty late, like 10:30, 11 at night. And this guy came in, and he walked over and he grabbed like a Snickers bar and a Kit Kat. Also, he has diabetes, so that's another scary sort of part of it. He grabbed 2 candy bars, walked up to almost to the counter, and then he turned around and put them back. And then he turned around and went back to the counter and asked for a pack of cigarettes. And, the guy got him down and put him on the counter. And he was like, that'll be, however much that is. And then he sort of mumbled and then just like walked out and left. And at first I was like, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense. But then later I would find out that, he actually did used to smoke like 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And he's 85. So, but it's, I really appreciate everybody who has reached out. I appreciate all the prayers and stuff. But yeah, it's
weird because, we talk about things like this that happen in a, like a curious way on our show. We've talked about missing 411 before. We've talked about, even like abductions and all kinds of stuff. It's so, I don't know. It's hard. It puts a different perspective for sure when it's something so personal like this, And that's part of the reason. Honestly, although just scheduling wise, last week, it was boots on the ground every day, and so it was difficult, if not impossible, for us to get in the studio anyway. But it just kind of felt weird, and it still does a little bit, if I'm being honest, to talk about things when you've got somebody missing in your family, it's tough.
Well, but I will say, just to sort of wrap it up on a positive note, like I said, I typically like to approach these things like a child with, wide-eyed wonder, and I like to believe that there's magic in the world, and that, these sort of fringe topics that are, constantly sort of like looked down on and like debunked, quote unquote. I like to believe a lot of this stuff is real. And so in saying that, in the least insensitive way that I can. I like to look at this as like, maybe my uncle, maybe he did just disappear into the ether and he's, living his best life back in the 50s or who knows. But it is strange, especially the car and everything. And we've scoured every ditch, every ravine, every side road, every dirt road, everything. And there's just no possible, I mean, he just disappeared. And so I like to believe that, maybe he's still out there.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
well, and, not to just plow through and get into what we were talking or planning to talk about last week. It's interesting because I think optimistically, I would like to think that too.
Yeah.
Maybe all the while he's been inventing a time machine, and maybe he went back into like late 40s, early 50s, in his prime. And I do, I know Tyler today has a story that he's super excited to get into, and he sold me on it instantly. And honestly, well, it's not very hard to convince me to do any kind of stories that deal with time travel. But before he dives in, I've kind of got something that I sort of uncovered as I was digging through some articles and old theories and stuff, trying to find some sort of juicy, lesser known nuggets that haven't already been beaten to death by History Channel reruns. And I stumbled onto something, man, that I had never heard of. So I stumbled onto something about Roswell that I don't really think gets talked about that much because I've actually never really heard it. And
which, by the way, take a drink out there. We will cover Roswell.
Yeah, no, eventually, but it's like, do we have to? I mean,
Well, Roswell will probably be the finale of all time episode because.
Oh, really? Final, last.
I mean, maybe
series like finale, that would be rad.
Maybe
Is no more. Man, you're already planning for that, folks. You heard it here first. This is an exclusive.
I'm just saying it's such a big.
Well, I was going to say something a little less
intense,
apocalyptic, and I know that's just you're in the mood right now, and that's fine. I'm sorry.
Which, real quick though, by the way, would you say that time travel is your number one?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that's what
100%. Yeah. And you mean just mean in terms of topic and stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, I think
of all
everyone in the world by now, if they listen to 3 episodes and that's it, they'll know that about me, I think.
Yeah.
Here's what I think about just a Roswell episode in general. Instead, I think we pick maybe, I don't know, 3 of the top sort of, everyone's talked about it before, Roswell, something else, and we just let the listeners or the best friends around the Patreon vote, and then we'll do that. You know what I mean? Rather than it just being like, hey guys, this is it. Okay. Look, I say that about Roswell and you say that about Roswell because basically everyone knows sort of the basic beats of the Roswell crash. June 24th, 1947, just a week or so after pilot Kenneth Arnold had his now iconic flying saucer sighting over Mount Rainier. Something very strange comes crashing down in the middle of nowhere in Lincoln County, New Mexico, not too far from Roswell.
Which?
Hold on.
Well,
okay, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No. I was just going to say, it's just funny hearing that because I am of a completely different belief of what I think that is.
Okay.
Than when I first started.
Sure.
Continue.
But ever since then, I'm saying that Roswell has been sort of the Mount Everest of UFO lore. It's been the Mike Tyson, insert whatever number 1 champion you want here. Michael Jordan. Okay. Yeah. King Griffey Jr. He goes. It's had everything from books.
Raphael Belliard.
Okay. Everything from books, documentaries, investigations by the Air Force, the GAO, and I mean, dude, how many movies, right? Just end up there. Over the years, we've seen theory after theory roll out. Of course, the infamous weather balloons. You got Project Mogul. You've got secret Soviet spy tech, monkeys and Nazi rockets. Maybe they were, looking for bells.
Or little people, even.
High altitude military tests gone wrong. And of course, aliens from another world. If you grew up in the 90s and you hit your kind of teen years like we did in the 90s, Man alive.
Huge.
I mean, dude, X-Files, it was like this explosion of alien lore, I feel like, with Unsolved Mysteries and X-Files and all these things that we used to all watch and kind of get like a little too scared, but not too scared.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I did see pretty much the researcher for Roswell that kind of brought that case back from the dead at DragonCon, a guy named Stanton Friedman. So,
yeah. And you were like,
Rest in
hey,
peace.
Pete.
hey, Pete. What's wrong with that guy?
Yeah. Now, for me personally, I've always had a fascination with sort of just extraterrestrial aliens and how that image is sort of morphed from little green men to alien grays and all of that. Some people really kind of lean in, especially around this time. Like, was it some sort of Cold War era military experiment that went sideways? You know, was it some sort of rad strangeness that was born out of secrecy and 1940s paranoia? Was it some sort of experiment, you know? I mean, I don't know if it's because
Or
my
an
son and
offering
I,
from angels.
or an offering from angels, haven't heard of that one before, but I like it. I don't know if I'm leaning more towards like the science lab type breakout scenario because my son and I are rewatching Stranger Things. But, and it's kind of a big old but here. What if it wasn't aliens at all? What if it wasn't military at all? What if what crashed in Roswell wasn't from another planet, but from another time? Now, there's a theory out there that I found. And the theory is that what went down in Roswell was an actual time machine, a vehicle from our own future. And one of the people who gave this idea some real thought was a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso.
Corso, yep.
So he co-authored this controversial book called The Day After Roswell.
I know, I've read this book, but
You just kind of forgot the...
I mean, this would have been like literally in high school.
In the book, he claims he was directly involved in studying the tech recovered from the crash, and that he helped feed the tech to private defense contractors, kind of seeding the growth of modern day advancements. Now, dude, we've kind of talked about that multiple times, you know, talking about how as at the very least, regardless of where this craft or any craft that's ever crashed here on Earth, regardless of where it originated, we've talked about how it's 100% plausible that we would quickly go there, extract all that stuff, and then begin reverse engineering. Because why wouldn't we?
Yep.
You know, even if it was just, let's say, you know, even on the most simplest of explanations in terms of its origin, it's just a spy craft from another country, we're still going to do the same thing. That's part of the no-brainer methodology that would happen for national defense purposes at the very least.
Which it wasn't only seeded out to military contractors. It was sent out to I believe General Electric, Bell Laboratories. And so, you know, sort of an encompassing look is man, and I wish I could find it. I found it years ago, but I haven't seen it in a long time. But there's somebody broke down, they kind of did like a infographic or like a graph of all the technology that we had up to, you know, and I think it was said 1947, but even if you look at it from 1950 to 1960, you know, so by the time that these companies started successfully back engineering this stuff, within that 10 years, suddenly we had just crazy amounts of, you started looking at the silicon diode, you started looking at all of this technology that wasn't even a thought up until that point.
Right.
Which is, pretty fast.
And I think the last time we talked about that, I brought up the fact that we went to this museum in, I think it was Indiana. It was this really amazing children's museum, maybe the best I've ever been to. It's humongous. We ended up spending an entire day there. It was awesome. But they had this section that was dedicated to basically just technology, but cell phone technology and everything. And they had this amazing display of every cell phone that ever existed kind of thing. It was this huge thing. And then they had an area where they sort of had the elements and stuff that you use to make all these things, the screens from all that. And you're looking at it and look, I know in the same way that a caveman would look at a I don't know, like a battery operated drill or something and consider it to be just unexplainable magic. For the first time in life, I guess, I was looking at all this stuff going like, how the heck does someone take this and turn it into that, And so it's a pretty easy, it's easiest for me to kind of connect the dots and being like, they reverse engineered something that they didn't have before, And
Which, by the way, I made a mistake by saying silicon diode. What I meant was like just the semiconductors and like the silicon based, like, I don't know, like chipsets and like basically the very early era of like computers and microprocessors.
Yeah, it's mind boggling. And just to put it at a relative scale, I'm equally mind boggled by how a vinyl record works. Anyway, now,
Me too.
every time I think about it for too long, I'm just like, it's fake. I'm in a simulation. Okay.
Especially the old ones where it's just the giant tube.
I mean, like you're
Like
putting
speakers.
music, like, come get out of
It's
town.
so bizarre.
Do me a favor,
Yeah.
get out of town. All right.
Yeah.
His story was praised. It's been torn apart, dissected, laughed at, and everything in between. But what makes it really interesting is while people usually peg him as sort of one of the main "it was aliens" guys, he actually floated something else entirely. He believed that the bodies found in the wreckage weren't aliens at all. He said that they were genetically engineered beings created specifically to endure the brutality of space travel, but not the actual pilots or inventors of the craft. He also speculated up until his death in 1998 that we might still have no clue who really made the ship or where or when it came from. So I never really thought of it. That's kind of what jumped out at me the most. I mean, first, that it was a time travel theory. I'm like, oh man, I've never heard that about Roswell. Second, the fact that these are beings that are genetically engineered to endure sort of like the challenges physically that would happen if you did time travel, Which is kind of a bummer too, because then that means, yes, we can send these weird genetically modified beings into time, but we can't go, which kind of makes sense too.
I've also heard that, two different things. I've heard the theory to where basically what you're saying about like the little alien grays are, because, any sort of sightings or abduction phenomena related to them is always very much like, they appear organic, but they're very robot-like.
Yeah.
And that, no emotion, none of that. It's just very, very cold, almost like a machine. And I have heard the theory, which I've always kind of liked. So there's a thing called the Van Allen radiation belt, which prevents us from like going far, technically going to the moon in 1965, but whatever. It's something that would destroy like organic life in a way. So there's that theory that like that these sort of, I don't know, what would you call them? Like synthetic organic humanoids almost. They're not actually sort of like alive in the sense that, it's just sort of like very future tech. And so they're able to make it through that radiation without it really affecting them.
I wonder now that you said that, and I'm not trying to put down human nature, but I'm wondering, if you could create some sort of, not necessarily mindless being, but one that is, quote, not human. I think the emotional detachment from that would be sufficient enough that people would send them back and not really like worry about it. They'd be like, well, I mean, who cares? Well, so even if that radiation did affect them, it's kind of like, well, who cares? They're going to get the information we need. And
it's like us sending like a chimp into space. I mean, in a way,
or a dog or whatever. Yeah.
We pretend
the
that
guinea
we care,
pigs.
but-
I mean, that's why the term, the phrase, they're the guinea pig, is because we've done the same thing to guinea pigs.
But one thing that you said, which is kind of interesting, and I've never really thought about this until now, is...
Oh, only kind of interesting. Okay.
Well, no, Joe, hear me out. So I've told the story, which I swear I'm going to actually find this story, on a future episode. But I talk about this. I've talked about this numerous times on the show. There was this UFO conference, a guy from, I think it was like Skunk Baxter, so like Skunk Works, which is, it's like a Lockheed Martin, like a military defense contractor that's like, they built like the SR-71 Blackbird and the stealth technology and stuff. And these guys who were like sort of early in the day, I mean, this would have been like, I think late 80s, early 90s. And basically this guy gives his whole speech. And then at the very end, he sort of ends his speech with, "We now have the technology to take ET back home."
Oh, yeah.
And so they kind of ambush him in the parking lot. I mean, not really, but they're young. These guys, like in their, I think one or two maybe in their teens, and all these guys would go on to be like sort of legends in the field of UFO research and that kind of thing later as they get older. But they're just so excited, and they kind of ambush him, and they're asking all these questions, and they're like, so what does that even mean? How, like, what have you guys developed that could take ET back home? And he says, well, let me turn it back on you. Let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And, I'm sure they were like, oh, extrasensory perception. And he's like, that's how we do it. So I wonder, talking about the alien grays being sort of these like, sleeves or bodies that aren't actually organic, what if that's how they're being controlled by like people's minds, like ESP? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that it's like they're like remote controlling these things, like you were saying. Like if something happens to it, who cares?
Yeah.
So it's like their mind is the thing that's able to kind of live through this little alien gray, and that's why you don't really see any emotion or anything like that.
Man,
I don't
that's
know.
crazy.
I don't know. Could be.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah. I don't know how they would do that across time and space, but I'm sure there's a mathematician that could explain it all to us.
Oh, yeah.
There's also been sort of theories about, well, are they our descendants in the future? Is this what 1,000 years of evolution looks like for the human race? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't like that one.
I've never got into that either. Yeah.
I'd rather it be something else. And then it's interesting, too, because then folks will say, well, then why did they pick Roswell in 1947?
Well, you have the White Sands Proving Ground, which is not very far, which is where, like, the atomic bomb,
right.
and they were doing atomic testing and stuff. So that's always sort of been the consensus of, like, why that particular area.
Right. And the thing about it all, to kind of wrap up this story so you can get into yours, is that no matter what, some agency recovered some kind of tech from there. And presumably based on the technology that we had in 1947, like you were sort of talking about and alluding to earlier, it had to be something that was futuristic. And in any case, we recovered something, we've been reverse engineering it, and maybe this Roswell cover-up isn't about hiding beings from another world, but hiding a future we're not ready to face.
I like that.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
The NBA playoffs are here, and I'm getting my bets in on FanDuel. Talk to me, Chuck GPT. What do you know?
All sorts of interesting stuff, even Charles Barkley's greatest fear.
Hey, nobody needs to know that.
New customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
21 plus and present in Virginia. Must be first online real money wager. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent. This is Joshua Cutchin, and you're at my home for weirdness. That would be rad.
All right, so this case is sort of one of the things that was sort of the impetus for this time travel, this little excursion into the topic of time travel. And honestly, this is a case that I'm kind of on the fence with, because there has been a lot, since it has come out, there's been a lot of people who, I mean, mainly one guy, this guy and his YouTube channel, it kind of, tries to sort of debunk it and all this stuff. But there's a lot of stuff in the debunking that also doesn't really add up. But the reason that I like this case so much is that it's kind of a current case. I mean, I can't, it happens in 2006. I can't think of another time travel case that's anywhere close to that as far as in our modern, 2025. You have John Teeter, you have the man from Torred, but that's older, I think, too. But anyway, all that to say, here's a case that happens on April 23rd of 2006 in the city of Kiev. So the police in the area, or Kiev.
Just you did it right.
Yeah. Although, you know what? I looked it up, and the reason that there is discrepancy between stroking out, between the pronunciation there is different pronunciation between the Russian version and the Ukrainian version. Yeah. But anyway, so the police in Kiev, they receive a strange call, and there's a man apparently that's, it kind of has that look of like a crazy homeless guy just sort of wandering around. He seemed very confused. He seemed kind of scared. Oddly enough, though, he was dressed in what looked like sort of 50s or 60s clothes.
Okay.
And the police finally showed up on the scene, and he identified himself as Sergei Ponomarenko. And he insisted that he was from the year 1958. The police on the scene asked for identification, which he actually did have. But when they checked the documentation, they were surprised to find that it was issued from the Soviet Union, which would have been possible if he would have been like an old man, maybe, having that like that sort of identification. But again, he's, in his 20s, and that kind of identification would have, would have been long gone, like decades ago. And so it was weird too, because his birthday on the ID said that he was born in 1932, but he, obviously was in his 20s, and he looked almost exactly as he did, to them currently in 2006. So in the photo, again, which is identification that was, long gone by then, he was still in his 20s as he was in person. So the police, I think they kind of think he's still crazy. And so, but he goes along with it, and he goes with them. They take him to a mental health facility, where he gets interviewed by a guy named, and I've seen several different spellings, Pavlo Kudrikov, or Pablo, I don't think that's right, but maybe it is, who, kind of gets him alone, and he's sort of doing the interrogation thing. And, we ask him a bunch of questions, how did you get here? If you truly are from the 50s, it's kind of that sort of therapist kind of technique, to where they're not making fun of it, they're not laughing, they're just kind of like, oh, well, if you're from the 50s, then how did you get here? Kind of taking everything.
Listening.
Right.
Not interrupting.
Which is what you do all the time.
Not at all. Go ahead.
And he basically replies that it was in the middle of the day, and he wanted to go for a walk in the city. He says, I took my camera, but when I left my house, I saw a strange object that was bell-shaped that was flying in the sky. And, you know, he tried to like sort of explain it. And then I guess he realizes, oh, well, you know, I don't even really need to explain it. Like, I have a photo on my camera. And he pulls up his camera. And Dr. Kudrikov, you know, being skeptical, decided to continue going along with it. And so he takes the camera and, you know, he was sort of a camera aficionado, if you will. And he recognizes the camera immediately as an old Yashima camera, which is sort of like, it's like those ones that we would see in thrift stores all the time, like the little box cameras that you look down, you know?
Yeah. I've got one. Not that one, but yeah.
Yeah, and
there's like a viewer, like almost like a mirrored lens
what is
on
that
top.
Thing called? Like,
basically,
what's
that
like
you're
the
looking,
main one called?
I don't know, I mean a viewfinder or something. I'm not sure, but and you look down, and you're looking down, even though the subject's like right in front of you because the lens is in front of you. Yeah, those are really cool.
Yeah. It's almost like the periscope kind of sort of motif.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a Yashima camera. He ends up calling another sort of professional. They have the film developed, and they come to realize that the type of film that was in there, which again, the camera and the film all look brand new. They realized that that particular brand of film went out of business in the 70s. It went out of manufacturing in the 70s. And the manufacturing date on that particular roll of film says 1956. And again, like, it looked totally brand new, like you bought it yesterday. What was weird is once they developed these photos, it shows Kiev, but it looks like you're looking at Kiev in the 50s.
Okay. So it's like era appropriate. Like all the vehicles and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Buildings.
Everything's buildings, clothes, vehicles, all that stuff. And Dr. Kudrikov notices that not only were all the buildings old, but there was a couple featured in one of the photos standing in front of a building that did not exist anymore. The man in the photo looked exactly like Sergei. Yeah. And not only that, but the last photo on the reel shows a bell-shaped, unidentified flying object up in the sky that he took a photo of.
Weird.
Yeah. So he doesn't really know what happens leading up to that. He says he kind of like ran downstairs to take a photo of this bell-shaped object in the sky. And, you know, one moment he's taking a picture, and the next moment, you know, he's trying to figure out where he is. And it's kind of weird because there's some sources talk about, you know, he looked down at his camera, you know, like you mentioned, you're looking down at the camera, but it's facing forward. And he said he's trying to get the UFO in frame. And then as he like looks up, there was like a bright flash. Other people say that when he looked up, everything had just changed. I don't know. I don't know if that's sort of an embellishment, you know. But basically, he looks up, flash or not, he's in 2006. The hypothesis that Dr. Kudrikov came to was that Sergei could have been involved in some sort of alien abduction, to where the craft that took him flew across the universe at the speed of light, and according to Einstein's theory of relativity, it would mean that Sergei would have experienced like time dilation, which is, you know, if you've seen Interstellar, you know, when they step off of the ship and then they get back on, you know, everybody else has aged, you know, much faster, but they're still young, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Which is just, that's one of those concepts, man, that it's so amazing. And that whole sequence is like so heartbreaking, you know?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, imagine the anxiety and the haste that you would have, kind of knowing like, hey man, y'all got to hurry it up. You know, we got to go. Because all of those years are just they're just passing by. Your kids are just growing up in the meantime. Oh, it's just.
Yeah. So much like the man from Tared, we have the security footage that shows Sergei walking back to his ward in the mental, care facility, closes the door. After that, he was never seen again.
And just to clarify real quick, what Tyler means by much like the man from Tared, we actually don't have footage of the man from Tared, but just like this guy sounds like, and this is, crazy. The man from Tared went into this hotel room, closed the door. There's no in, no way out.
And I think the man from Tared had like 2 guards outside.
Yeah,
too.
posted out. Yeah. And I think they were going to get him some food, and then when they came back, poof, gone. Yeah. And if you aren't familiar with that story, or you just need you want to brush up, then you can listen to that episode here.
Hear more about this incredible story on That Would Be Rad, Season 1, Episode 4, The Man from Tared.
Yeah, it's a great one. And honestly, it's the first thing that came to mind when I heard this, because there's so many things that are very eerily similar. He has his identification that everything looks legit, but obviously it was from a different country that didn't exist. But anyway, so he, you see this guy, you see Sergei walk back into his room, and then that was it. I guess the next footage that you have is you see, the doctors or the assistants or whatever coming to get him, and there's nobody in the room. The other interesting thing is that that's when Sergei left, he ended up leaving the camera and the photos. So I guess the police started running, just to kind of get any sort of credibility from this story. They started researching and really kind of digging back into historical records. It showed that there was actually a Sergei Ponomarenko that was declared missing in Kiev in the 1960s. But the other interesting thing is that the woman in the photo on the film that he had, the photos that he had.
Yeah.
The woman in the photograph that Sergei claimed was his girlfriend, 70 years ago. Well, they found her, who, again, she's in her 70s or even later, much older, and they ended up tracking her down, and she corroborated the same thing. She said, yes, Sergei had totally disappeared at the time. We didn't know anything about it. And it was a day in 1958. But the interesting thing that she said was that he returned just a few days later, the same amount of time that he was present in 2006. So, I don't know, 2 days or so. The lady then would clarify that after he came back, Sergei then disappeared again in the 70s, but this time he never returned.
Man.
Yeah, and so if you thought that was the end to the lady, it just adds more questions, because the police investigators would also find in the lady's possession an old postcard, which was dated 2050, with Kiev in the background, except, this time there's skyscrapers and it's much more modernized, I guess, if you will. And it shows a photo of Sergei, and he has a mustache, and he looks much older. And there's a note that says that he will be back soon, but something must have gone wrong, because Sergei, he never returned. So it is one of the most documented kind of cases. There's I think there's a sort of a tongue-in-cheek kind of comedy that was written about it. But yeah, it's
wait, there's a movie about it?
Yeah, I think it's
just
like
a foreign movie that we'd have to try to find.
Yeah. It's like it's like a small budget, kind of comedy kind of thing. But yeah, it's so one of the debunkers say, oh well, every bit of this was because of a Ukrainian show that came out that was called Aliens, that came out in 2009 or 10.
Okay.
And they say, oh yeah, all this, any of these videos that you see or photos, these were all just from the show. But that's actually not true because I used the Wayback Machine and I found a couple like forum locations to where they were talking about this exact same thing. So I don't know, maybe it was sort of inspired by that, and then this alien show just sort of, embellished it or whatever. But they're like, oh, well, this couldn't be true because there's a video of him that shows the time on the mic. There's some kind of discrepancy between like the time on the microwave and yada yada yada. I don't really know. And then they're like, oh, well, this show that there's a guy that has a video that's like quote unquote like the big like debunking video, and he basically says like, oh, well, this couldn't be the case because it says here that he was born in June, but then which would have been on a Sunday, but it was actually a Wednesday, and so the confusion I think comes from like the actual sort of story, and then whatever the portrayal was on this like Ukrainian television show. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So there are like sort of a lot of like back and forth. Like people are like, no, that's impossible. There's no way that, any sort of, a person in the 50s that, made a meager living, that, anything beyond like, or anything unless you were like just totally rich. There's no way that he would have like a camera like that at the time because they didn't really have like trade, so he wouldn't have had this, I believe like a Japanese camera at the time, which would have been like pretty high tech, that particular. Oh, I think they were called like Rolleiflexes.
And I can't remember if you said, did he explain that like there was a purpose behind his travel, or was it all accidental?
He didn't really say. My sort of guess is that if there was embellishment by the show, to me it starts to get a little like, I don't know, is this sort of like an add-on when you're talking to the old lady now who was his girlfriend from the photo, and she's like, oh, well, here's a postcard of him from like 2050. Mm-hmm. To me, that's the only thing that I can think of that sort of could possibly be, oh, this could be fake.
Yeah.
But all the other stuff, it seems like it was a very accidental kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
I think the only way you sort of debunk it is you think of it in terms of, okay, like maybe he went to an estate sale, found this, how sometimes you find these like, oh man, this thing has never even been opened.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then, he comes out with this story. But, man, it doesn't matter what year, but 2006 included. Mm-hmm. Kiev and all those places aren't really the kind of place you want to be messing around and getting locked up, even if, you know what I mean? And then
how did he escape? Well, also, I mean, you look at like, that whole area, post like Soviet Union and like the bloc and everything, you're definitely not going to show up with papers and identification that would place you back in the old Soviet Union, because like spies and like that, it's such a
huge risk for just like a
huge risk.
They'll talk about it in the future.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, dude, they're gonna be like, well, we can't risk it.
Yeah.
So
firing squad.
And also like there is, I don't know, a lot of the details just seem very, what's the word? Like there's a certain amount of like high strangeness to it. It kind of reminded me of like the Dyatlov Pass, which I actually looked into, and I was hoping there would be like a little more of a connection. I mean, this is 1958 when he disappeared. The Dyatlov Pass incident
was like 70s or something.
No, 1959. Next year.
I knew that. That's what I said.
That's what I said. But it's it is 1,200 miles away, which I was hoping the
it would be a little bit,
mountains or whatever were closer. But the reason that I thought of that is because not only in the photos that they found from the Dyatlov Pass, all the like teenagers and young people that died, I think there were like 9 of them. They did find a camera and they were able to develop the film. And there's 2 photos that are very, very odd. One of the photos shows what looks like could be a Yeti. it's just a silhouette, and it's so scary, especially once you find out like what actually happened to these kids.
Mm-hmm.
And did we ever cover this fully?
No, I don't think so.
All right, take a drink. We're gonna do it eventually. but not only is there like what looks like it could be a Yeti, or maybe somebody in like a full head to toe ninja like ski suit. But there's also another photo that shows, and I think, oddly enough, I think it was also the last photo on the roll that shows this bright light in the sky, which is really, really pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I mean, I would love to get my hands on those developed photos.
Oh,
you know?
I know. I mean, I think you can find, I think on like archive.org, I've found all of the Dyatlov Pass photos, but I haven't really looked into this to see if you can find these photos online. But
it's interesting because I feel like I've heard this before, kind of, but I'm not 100% sure. You know what I mean?
I definitely hadn't, which I was so surprised that it was so recent and that I had never heard of it.
Yeah. But I mean, it does sound familiar, but it kind of sounds similar to the one where, and I don't even know if we've talked about it here. I know that we may have in passing, but the story where this guy shows up, I don't know if he's in New York, you know, and he's got the suit that, you know, he's like, no, I just got this suit from, you know, X, Y, and Z, and they're like, it doesn't.
He has like a, is it like a coat check ticket?
Something like that, yeah.
Something, yeah.
You know, that's kind of what it reminded me of. Or the one where it's like you see the pictures of the guy and he looks like a hipster, you know, that famous internet one.
I still think that one is odd. Like, I've probably looked at that 100 times, and every time I see it, I'm just like, man, like, it's weird to think like, oh, well, I don't know. I think your brain goes to like, okay, the haircut, you know, it could have been like,
you can explain away almost every element of it, but it's still bizarre, man.
And he's got weird glasses. The haircut doesn't fit. He's got like a shirt
almost
with a
like
logo on it.
Yeah, almost like a logo tee. And then I feel like there's something else about it too. Oh no, I'm thinking of, you know, you see those photos where it looks like somebody's got like a dang iPhone in their hand.
Oh yeah,
you know, that kind of stuff.
Although I've heard those, I think it was like a Charlie Chaplin movie where you see these two ladies. You know, it's sort of the end of day work bell, and all these people are sort of, you know, exiting this factory or whatever they're working at, and you see these two ladies coming at, and one of them is like holding up what looks kind of like an iPhone to her ear. But the debunkers would say, "Oh, well, that's not true. That's which I don't even know if this is true or not. It is some kind of like hearing device, which could be the case. I don't know.
Yeah,
those are a little different.
Sure.
The hipster one though is like
that one's wild for sure.
I don't know, man.
So with all of these though, I find it more fascinating when, you know, yes, that picture's weird of the hipster guy. We don't know much about it though. I think there's other stories where there's a guy who shows up. I think he's even talking about like something's going to happen in the stock market, and then he just like disappears, and then that thing happened. You know, there's that thing, dude.
Oh, what was that?
I don't remember exactly, but I swear he also similarly gets brought into questioning. You know, he's being questioned by police.
Man, what was that? Have we talked about that on the show?
You know, I don't know.
Yeah, he. I mean, it's straight up Back to the Future. Yeah, he like shows up. He's like questioned, or maybe he even like turns himself in.
Something like that. Yeah.
And he's like, "This is gonna happen. This. I
need to tell somebody, you know.
Yeah.
Protect yourselves, and so like even that kind of stuff. Well, I tell you what. There's one other thing before we go that's kind of similar to your story a little.
Okay.
So let's take a quick break. When we get back, I'm going to dive right in.
Right on.
We will return after these messages.
It's a pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire.
You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you?
Is anyone out there?
fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. So, in this one, we're kind of close to 2006. We're going to flash back a little bit further, though, to 2003. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
This time it's in China. Okay, we're at a cell phone manufacturing plant. Okay?
By the way, Rudolph Fentz is the one of the guy that showed up in Times Square.
That's it. Yeah. Okay. So we're in China. We're at a cell phone manufacturing plant, and this is still, it's 2003, so it's early days of cell phone technology.
Right.
I mean, I think maybe the Motorola Razr is just, flip phones are new. Everybody's still rocking the Nokia, and they're happy because they can put their favorite college on the, you know what I mean? On the front of it. Okay, sure. You can play Snake all the live long day.
God,
my wife is the champion, dude.
She is the champion.
Okay. Security at this factory catches this guy sneaking around a restricted lab area. Not just once, but repeatedly. He's finally stopped with several internal components hidden in his jacket, like prototypes, okay, like bits and pieces, stuff that haven't even been cleared for development or release yet, okay? Mm-hmm. Naturally, as I would, they assume that this dude is doing some serious corporate espionage. Coming in there, he works for some competitor, trying to steal the technology so that they can be the first to the market and all of that. And so they confront him, and he says, no, that's not what it is. You've got it all wrong, okay?
Mm-hmm.
He tells them that he's a time traveler. He says that he was sent back in time to retrieve early mobile technology because something about that particular circuitry was critical to the infrastructure of his time in the future.
I mean, that's John Teeter all day.
Right. And the guards are like, okay, buddy. And they haul him off, okay? Because this is China.
To the gulag.
Yeah. Like, good luck. That's what we're saying about this guy in Kiev. Like, they don't mess around. This is not,
Unless he was really crazy, it is not worth it.
So he gets transferred to a local police station, step one. Then, of course, they notify the mental health officials to come evaluate him. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing is supposed to go into, he's supposed to go into this official, holding and everything. 2 days later, poof, vanished. No records of release, no surveillance footage, no paperwork. His name doesn't even appear in any official files. According to the reports that trickled out later, mostly through, of course, probably 2chan or whatever it's called, rumor mills and Reddit and all this, forum posts, the guy was just erased. That's, yeah.
I love
it. He's just a plainclothes dude that was sneaking in there trying to get some components, much like Teeter. And I remember now, I think John Teeter, that whole thing was from 98 to 2000, around this time.
Okay.
Maybe, maybe this guy worked for the same organization.
Holy cow.
You know what I'm saying?
And John Teeter was looking for a piece that was in an IBM computer from, I know it was from the 80s, but maybe 81.
Yeah.
Or something. So
something
that could,
like that, yeah.
Yeah, think about it. If we're to hypothesize that all this is true, time travel is totally something that we will eventually, come up on, and it's a real thing, you would have these units of people being like, oh, well, we need this particular thing. We need this. And it's almost like a retro causality type thing to where it's to be able to time travel, we're going to need this. So you're sending people with already having the technology. Right. You're sending people to get this thing to accomplish that thing that it's pretty fascinating.
We're also assuming that they're coming from the same future year or whatever. Who knows?
Or maybe it was a Chinese. We're not
here we go.
necessarily on the best terms.
Maybe it was a Chinese.
No. I'm saying maybe it was a Chinese, not spy, but
time spy.
Time spy. Yeah.
Then okay, that's what you're gonna say.
Yeah, I mean, it would be like the opposition.
Okay.
They're trying to like...
Yeah. Well, instead of a space race, it's sort of like a time travel race.
Oh.
And then maybe they're trying to like change different things so that, maybe they're trying to change the future by doing this, doing that. So that
I got it, dude.
like, America crumbles and you know what I mean?
No, not even that, dude. They're changing the future so that they can go back into the past and completely erase that this particular machine or part was ever even created. So then America can't figure out how to time travel.
Man.
Pretty cool.
This kind of gets into something else that I was going to talk about called the para-temporal loop. I mean, it's so weird that it ended up going in this direction. Basically, there's this theory. I'm not going to get too deep into it because it is one of those theories that really makes you kind of be like, wait, what? So this guy named Joshua P. Warren.
Oh, he's awesome.
Yeah, and he has this theory called the, like I said, para-temporal loop hypothesis. And, initially it kind of just sounds like, if you were going to kind of view it in its most simplistic form, it's seemingly like this sort of average multiverse time travel type stuff. But the more he sort of explains it in this article that I read, it starts to sound more like a strange Philip K. Dick book, really.
Yeah.
The basic setup is this. He says, okay, imagine that someday in the far, far future, like 1 million years from now, some species evolves and becomes the new sort of dominant intelligence on Earth. So, in other words, humans aren't the dominant species anymore. It's like a Fish-Man, okay?
Right.
Now, the Fish-Man becomes this brilliant scientist. He figures out time travel, and he travels back in time. And let's say he picks the year 1920. But since he probably, I say 1920, maybe the first person he meets is H.P. Lovecraft, not sure. But, he tries to disguise himself so that he can blend in, so that he can blend. Oh, my God. So he can blend in. So he can blend, throw it on my bed. So he can blend in. Here's where it gets interesting. He's not just kind of time hopping for fun, much like this 2003 Chinese cell phone factory time traveler guy. This Fish-Man's got an agenda. He kind of wants to tweak the past in ways that will improve his future. Maybe that means helping his species thrive down the line. Maybe it means sabotaging his enemies or, going to Red Lobster and keeping them from inventing popcorn shrimp. I'm not sure. But he lays the groundwork for a better future, okay? Now, here's the problem. There's no way to know for sure what impact his changes will have. He could go back and end up totally messing things up. He could blink out of existence like Marty McFly's family or whatever.
With like the bootstrap paradox.
Right. But if he plays his cards right, he returns to the future and finds that life is way better now. Okay, he's living in this, he's richer, he's stronger, living in this large undersea metropolis. But by doing that, and by changing anything at all, he then creates a new timeline, a new thread, okay? Which we're kind of somewhat familiar with, because of, they talk about it in a lot of movies, but most recently I would say like the Marvel stuff, all this
also
multiverse.
On this show, we talk about it.
Sure.
Constantly.
I just mean like it's more mainstream now than it ever has been. So that's kind of easier to wrap your head around. So now Josh says, imagine this Fish-Man comes back to his new, better future. He's super stoked, and everything's great. But then one day, it vanishes. It's all gone. Everything snaps back to how it used to be before he made his changes, and he can't figure out what happened. It turns out, in this theory, that sometime after the Fish-Man, like 1 billion years later, a brand new creature evolves. We'll call him...
Does the same thing.
We'll call him Sasquatch. Sasquatch also figures out time travel, and then he or she decides to go back to 1915 and make his own changes to history. Changes that accidentally undo everything that Fish-Man did.
Yep.
So then now Fish-Man's like, well, man, I've got to go back again to 1910 this time to fix what Sasquatch broke. Still feel like I said Sasquatch weird. Is it weird?
Sasquatch.
Roads. So anyways, it keeps going and going and going and all this this paratemporal loop. And he kind of brings this up, and this is super cool to me because it helps to explain actually a lot of strange things, Mandela effect stuff.
Yeah.
Also explains things like the Thunderbird photograph.
It's one of my all-time favorite stories.
Yeah. And, you know, it's like, how do so many people remember something that no one can seem to prove ever existed? I know that, I guess maybe the last episode or whatnot, maybe it was on the Patreon. I can't remember which, but I know we talked a little bit about the new season of Black Mirror. There's an episode that kind of deals with this it's a really interesting take on multiple timelines and being able to control that, I'll say. And it's not as sort of gut punch, feel bad, because there are some of those this season. Oof. I mean, God, the other day I was just in a depressed cloud because I finished the season. Anyway, it's a very cool explanation, this, what did I say, paratemporal hypothesis. He also suggests that maybe this is why paranormal stuff always feels so like slippery and you know, maybe it does help to explain things like, oh God, where the footprints end in Bigfoot, you know, and how UFOs seem like they're real and then, you know, they vanish, you know, all of that stuff. He also wonders if, you know, the men in black that show up after UFO sightings might also themselves be time travelers.
You know, man, I kind of think
we've kind of said that in a way, because like we've always talked about how they wear these timeless clothes. You could pop into 1910 or 2025 and you're going to look the same. You know what I mean? It's not going to stand out too much.
Well, or what if these are the more sort of general public version of the Greys, where they're being controlled elsewhere?
You're talking
remotely.
about the Men in Black?
Yeah, like by like, you know, super positioning and spooky action at a distance. They're being controlled like telepathically by someone in another time or elsewhere. They're just the ones who, you know, look closer to like humans.
Yeah.
And so, but I mean,
maybe I think it's more like they're time police.
Maybe,
you know, time cop.
Well, time cop. Man, I remember that one scene. Let's freeze it.
Press pause. That wasn't a good pause. It's going. Okay, go ahead.
She's waving at me.
People don't understand. When you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you perfected the pause.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I mean?
And then you'd keep tapping the pause button and it would
scene. It would like, what do they call that? There was not scroll forward, but there was a dang term for it on the VCR.
Like scrubbing?
No, that sounds a little weird, but keep going. Go ahead.
Anyway, it's interesting that you're bringing this up because, well, actually, let me say this about the Men in Black. The reason that I say that maybe they're just like another version of like the Greys is because there are all those weird accounts. And I swear, like, have another drink. We're going to do this episode on the Men in Black. But I kind of wish we could have Nick Redfern on to do it because he's like the guy. I mean, he has a whole book on like just the women in black, which is such a even more niche kind of thing. But anyway, his whole deal is like, not his, but like a lot of those earlier accounts, like late 50s, early 60s, people were having these just like the strangest things where like they would show up and, they would have like no eyebrows and they would have no lips, but they would be sort of painted with lipstick to make them look like they had lips.
Terrifying.
And they would have like a bunch of questions and then they would seem to like sort of power down and run out of battery almost as the conversation went on.
You know what I just thought about now that you say that? We kind of, in a way, I've been talking about this when we talk about simulation theory and when we talk about AI. When you think about it, you know, something that's got no lips, no eyebrows, but is kind of human, it seems like it's made by somebody that didn't quite get it right the first time. You know, you look at some of these like AI videos that are like so weird and freaky, but
the
then
hands are always...
Yeah, the hands are sometimes weird, or like their mouth, you know, and like, I don't know, man. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what, man? I think the last episode I read that theory that I was so fascinated with, where it's like this new idea that, oh man, we're like AI is like a new thing. When in reality, that's just a concept that's been put out by this like actual sort of more simulation theory AI that's been created before the beginning of civilization kind of thing. Anyway, but going back to sort of, the alien grays or the men in black, I did have this thought, and I read a while back, it was like the abstract of like some sort of like quantum, mechanics kind of article or something, but they were talking about how they didn't really come out and say the like whoever the writer was, I'm sure he was somebody in academia, but they didn't really come out and say that this stuff was the simulation theory. But basically the point of this article was he was saying that they're clearly, whether you're talking about, dimensional travel or time travel or, kind of like some of the stuff they're trying to do at CERN, there seems to be like a component of like determinism. And what I mean by that is like determinism is basically you have like from point A to point B. So basically say that our civilization is supposed to go from A to B and it's like a straight line. Well, kind of like what you said where, this frogman like does all this stuff to kind of counteract it and it throws it off course. Well, then, the system or like the AI or the simulation, writer of the codes, God, however you want to put it, he then sort of nudges the Sasquatch to do what he does, which like underwrites and gets rid of the stuff that the frog did. And then down the line, like, it's going to go out and then it's going to be sort of nudged back in line.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting to think of this stuff in terms of maybe these men in black, maybe these alien grays, maybe these time travelers. Maybe they are those things that sort of are there to kind of nudge us back into the path that we're supposed to take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of, especially on the Men in Black, sort of being like the time cops and sort of correcting these little things. I mean, it's kind of like, what's the Gerard Way, Umbrella Academy in a sense.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's always, in all those stories though, there's always that sort of thing that it's like, no matter what you do, there's like this pretty strong
like
narrative that it just kind of, you're still doing small things within like some parameters within this narrative that's just constantly moving forward no matter what,
Yeah, right.
In a way, it's kind of like, and I mean, I haven't got a chance to dive too far into it, but the Fourth Wall Phantoms.
Oh.
So we just got in author copies signed by the legend himself, Joshua Cutchin, of his brand new book, Fourth Wall Phantoms, Reflections on the Paranormal, Narrative and Fictions Becoming Fact.
Yeah.
And man, I can't wait to dive into this book.
Yeah, same here. There is one last little story. Since we kind of ventured slightly into the realm of the simulation theory, I got to read you this. It's like a blog post, but it's this story that I've wanted to talk about forever, and it's so fascinating. And it's another one of those examples of like, man, whether you want to call it religion, God, if you're an atheist, simulation theory, whatever, like it's things like this where synchronicity abounds that it's just, to me, it's impossible to think that like, oh, everything is just coincidence and circumstance. Like I believe that everything is perfectly like planned out. So basically this story has to do with the Wizard of Oz. Which, by the way, are you done? Is that all
I don't understand what you mean.
Like, is
like
that
have
all
I
you
watched
wanted
The
to
Wizard
cover?
of Oz before?
No. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
pretty
saying,
much. I mean, the only thing I was going to bring up is I've got a small other theory that's kind of funny, and that is that, like in the movie The Fly, how like one little thing gets in the machine and then it kind of messes up when he comes out the other end. Maybe you and I are the ones that invent time travel. I'm kind of hirsute, and maybe a part of me gets in there and then you come out as Bigfoot later. Anyway, go ahead.
That's pretty amazing. No, but today I want to go into this topic involving The Wizard of Oz, the original film. When MGM began planning the filming of Wizard of Oz in 1938, it was, as we know, released in 39. The production team, under the direction of Victor Fleming, was given a task. MGM did not want a costume designer to make the wizard's coat. They decided that they wanted a real classic Edwardian jacket. They were, after all, very popular in their day. How hard could it be to find one? And this is where this unlikely journey of fate and destiny began. Certainly, it could easily be found in one of the many costume houses in Hollywood, but after weeks of going through every costume shop in the city, the design team found that it might not be as easy as they thought. Undaunted, they turned to New York. If it could not be found in Hollywood, certainly they would find a coat fit for a wizard in New York City. But after going through every costume house on and off the island, again, they came up empty-handed. Determined not to give up, they decided to go to Chicago. And again, after going to every costume shop there, they began to think that they may never find the perfect wizard's coat. And in fact, it may not even exist. But as they walked back to catch the last train out of Chicago of Los Angeles, they happened on a used clothing store, what we would call a thrift shop today. Why they stopped there, no one knows. They didn't even know, but they did. As soon as they walked in, there it was, hanging on a rack toward the back of the store.
One of the flying monkeys.
A used Edwardian coat, a perfect Edwardian coat, a coat truly fit for a wizard. They bought it immediately and brought it back to Los Angeles. To everyone's amazement, the coat fit Frank Morgan perfectly. In that coat, it was as if he had been transformed into the Wizard of Oz himself. They did not have to make a single alteration, which that's kind of a big deal if you know about costuming and stuff. The coat fit him as if it had been made for him. Now, in the late 30s, filming in California and Hollywood had become popular places to make movies. The weather was mild and fairly consistent all year round, but in such a warm climate, the sound stages often became extremely hot. And with the massive lights needed to make movies, it was only possible to film 15 or 20 minutes at a time before shutting everyone down to cool off. Now, to add to that, Frank Morgan had a terrible problem. He perspired profusely.
Oh man, just like me.
Exactly like Woody. And by the time they got to the end of each take, he would be totally soaked in sweat. He could not take the coat off, so between takes, he would often turn his pockets inside out so that they would dry. One day, between takes, as Frank stood with his pockets turned inside out, one of the stagehands noticed a name tag sewn into one of the pockets. People gathered around as Frank turned it up to see the name of the original owner. And when he did, the entire cast and crew went silent, almost spellbound. You see, there was a reason why the coat was the perfect wizard's coat. The name of the original owner sewn into the pocket was none other than the real Wizard of Oz himself, L. Frank Baum, the man who wrote Wizard of Oz.
No freaking way, dude.
Is that not amazing?
Oh my gosh, man.
I mean, that is one of the greatest stories. The fact that they're filming in L.A., they go to New York, they look all over L.A., they go to Chicago. As they're leaving Chicago, they just happen to go into a store, they find it, and it's the writer of the book that the movie that they're filming is inspired by.
That's incredible, man.
Amazing.
I mean, that is just, man, that's amazing.
Yeah. Synchronicities abound. Well, we hope that you've enjoyed our sort of tour of time travel and brushing up against the simulation theory again. If you have your own simulation theory hypothesis or idea or story, or maybe you've had missing time, send it over to our Instagram, drop us a DM, if it's more of a long-form story, or if you prefer the old school way of shooting it to email, head on over to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Even better than that, if you have your own local legend or urban legend or, your own paranormal sort of story that you've encountered yourself, we'd love to hear about it, especially in your own voice. And you can do so on our voice memo feature over at thatwouldberadpodcast.com, where you can, possibly become a part of That Would Be Rad history. If you would like to support the show, you can do so by supporting us over on Patreon, The Rabbit Trail. It's more of what you love. It's a little looser, a little goosier. We recorded a little later at night, so, if you like our rambling, then you're going to love it. And we really appreciate it. It's definitely the best way to support us, and it helps, keep the lights on and keep this train on the tracks. Tell a friend about the show, leave a 5-star review, and go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think we have anything else.
All right, pal. Well, we love you, we appreciate you, and as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes.
Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
Shh.